One type of rhetorical synthesis prompt asks you, the reader, to identify the answer that shows familiarity or unfamiliarity of the novel, the author, the topic of that particular problem. So you can see the prompt says the student wants to introduce, and usually it's introduce or present. There's always a second part or a second condition that we have to take account of and note for our answer choices. In this case, paradise to an audience unfamiliar with the novel and its author. So if the audience unfamiliar, we probably might want to tell who the author is, or if it's an object, define what that object is, tell somebody who's unfamiliar about it to make them more familiar with it. Well, practically, what does that mean? In the answer choices, that means we want to look at the background bullet points, which is almost always those first two bullet points. If it's an unfamiliar prompt, the correct answer should include the information from those two bullet points to make the reader familiar with the background of that person, that object. If the prompt says familiar, you probably don't want to include any information from this first couple bullet points. So that's a practical approach of how to solve these problems. So with that, let's take a look at this one. The student wants to introduce paradise to an audience unfamiliar with the novel and its author. So I'm going to include information in my answer choice with those first two bullet points. Gurnah was awarded the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. He was born in Zanzibar in East Africa and currently lives in the UK. I want to include that information in my answer, so I'm going to look for answers that do include that. The rest says, many readers have singled out Gurnah's 1994 book Paradise for praise. Paradise is a historical novel about events that occurred in colonial East Africa. Okay, so we want to introduce this book Paradise, which is outlined in the second two bullet points, to an audience unfamiliar. So I want to look for that first two bullet points in there, background information on the author. So A says Gurnah, who wrote Paradise and later was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, was born in Zanzibar, East Africa. Okay, that definitely has the information from the first two bullet points. It's introducing him to an audience unfamiliar. So far, so good. The only problem here is it just simply says he wrote Paradise. It's not really introducing Paradise to the audience. It's not doing a sufficient job on the second condition. B, many readers have singled out Gurnah's 94 book Paradise, a historical novel about colonial East Africa, for praise. Okay, this includes the background information on the book. So it is definitely introducing the book. It's meeting our first goal of introducing Paradise to the book. This says nothing about the first two bullet points. They aren't in there at all. So this is a wrong answer. Note, wrong answers could meet the unfamiliar prompt or goal and not meet the presents or introduces goal, or they could meet the introduces presents goal and not the familiar unfamiliar prompt. So you could have one or the other in wrong answer choices typically, but they are therefore wrong answers. C, a much praised historical novel about colonial East Africa, Paradise, 1994, was written by Gurnah, winner of the 2021 Nobel Prize. This looks good. This is introducing the book. It's an historical novel. It's about colonial East Africa. It was written in 94 and it was praised. And we talk about who Gurnah is. He's the winner of the 2021 Nobel Prize. That's important background. Don't necessarily need to know he lives, or you could probably assume he was born in East Africa because he's writing about it. And it's not really important he lives in the UK. So this is meeting both goals. It's introducing the book and it's getting the audience familiar with the important things they need to know about Gurnah, its author. C will be the correct answer. Let's just look at D. Paradise is a historical novel about the events that occurred in colonial East Africa. That is a bit of an introduction to the actual book. Not great. It's missing some key points, like, it was a 1994 book and certain details in the bullet points. But it is an introduction. Gurnah's homeland. So it's telling us something about the author. We tell him his homeland is East Africa, which is what the book is about. But again, missing details from the bullet points. He's a Nobel Prize winner, etc., etc. Again, this is not a correct answer. It has a little bit of both points or goals we have to achieve, but not enough. C is a better answer than D on that prompt. So note, a wrong answer choice might have both goals, but just not sufficient information from the bullet points to be the best answer. Let's look at a slightly harder example, and this time with the familiar, not unfamiliar prompt. So in this case, the student wants to present to an audience already familiar. In this case, it's not a person the audience is already familiar with. It's the thermal inversions. It's an object or a thing or something else that they should be familiar with. Notice the prompt, the second condition that's there, it's presenting, like in the previous example, but in this case, it's presenting the study's findings. So a particular detail or attribute of something else that has to be presented. So keep these in mind. These will be our goals. So the first bullet point gives us our background information, in this case about thermal inversions. A thermal inversion is a phenomena where a layer of atmosphere is warmer than the layer beneath it. So the audience is already familiar with that. I don't want to include information from that in my answer choice as I look at it. Let's keep reading the bullet points. In 2022, a team of researchers studied the presence of thermal inversions in 25 gas giants. So that's what the study was. Gas giants are planets largely composed of helium and hydrogen. A little background on what they're studying. The team found, so here are the findings of the study, that gas giants featuring a thermal inversion are likely to contain heat-absorbing metals. That's going to meet our first condition, presenting the study's findings. One explanation for this relationship is these metals may reside in a planet's upper atmosphere where their heat is absorbed and it causes an increase in temperature. So that might be extra useful information we'll see in there regarding the findings. So with that, let's look at the different answer choices. A, heat-absorbing metals may reside in a planet's upper atmosphere. It actually doesn't connect the ideas right. It doesn't say the heat-absorbing metals are likely to be there for a thermal inversion, which is the topic of the study. So that's missing there. It's actually not a correct or full indication of the findings, and it says nothing about thermal inversions. So A is not going to be correct. B, the team studied thermal inversions in 25 gas giants, which are largely composed of helium and hydrogen. Okay, so among the studies, this is what they studied. This was not the findings. So if it's not the findings, it can't be the right answer. This is the wrong part of the study indicated, the wrong bullet point. C, researchers found that gas giants featuring a thermal inversion were likely to contain heat-absorbing metals. So we have a reference to what researchers found, and the gas giants, which they studied, featured thermal inversions that likely contained heat-absorbing metals. That is one of the findings, and it is properly referencing the study of thermal inversions here, which may reside in the planet's upper atmosphere, which is kind of the other part of the study's findings. This looks to be the correct answer. It's indicating the findings of the study, it's meeting that goal, and it's not including the full background information of defining what a thermal inversion is, but it's correctly showing the study's findings. Let's look at D. Gas giants were likely to contain heat-absorbing metals when they featured a layer of atmosphere warmer than the layer beneath it. Researchers found this phenomena is known as thermal inversion. Okay, here we're defining thermal inversion and what that is. Basically the information in that first bullet point. The audience is already familiar with thermal inversion. We don't need to make that definition. So D is not correct. So note some of the answer choices are not referencing thermal inversion as the topic. Some answer choices are introducing it or defining it to an audience that's already familiar with it. And some answers are providing just methods or other parts of the study, not the findings.